I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Magnus Karlsson. I'm professor at Marie Cederschiöld University, located here, just as Johan, that you met before. Today I will present something about trust and fundraising in wartime Ukraine, and I will do that in that order. So I will start to talk about trust, and I come to fundraising later. So don't, it's like a thriller, so to say. But I would like to tell you a little bit about why I have an interest in this. We started quite several years ago now to look at civil society in crisis. And at that time when we started, we had war as a faraway hypothesis, but we thought about civil crisis then. We asked ourselves, what can the Swedish society do in case of crisis? And we started before the pandemic, but at the pandemic we had a good chance to see what did the Swedish civil society actually do at that time. And later on, when the war broke out in Ukraine, or the full-scale invasion, I should say, then I was quite puzzled by the fact that everyone talked about that the civil society in Ukraine was doing a lot of things. They were important, almost already from the start. The civil society in Ukraine was described as even the third power after the military power and the international aid. Civil society was described as the third power of the country. And that was puzzling to me. Why was that? Because I learned that trust was very low in Ukraine, and that people didn't trust each other, and if you don't trust each other, how can you collaborate, and how can you have a vibrant civil society? And so I find that very interesting to understand, and so we applied for a large grant from the government and got it to study this, and since then I have been to Ukraine, primarily to Kiev, several times in order to discuss with civil society organizations and civil society researchers in Ukraine to understand this. And I have had a very good companion in this, Lena Wildereng, who has been worked as many things, but among other things as a firefighter at the front of Ukraine, Russia, the front there. And now she's also Russian speaking, so she has helped me to connect to different Ukrainian sources. First, let me give you a short description about being in Ukraine and doing this kind of things. And it's just like Johan told you earlier, most of Ukraine isn't that directly affected by the war. When we travel through Ukraine by cars, we often go there by cars. Then it's an absolutely beautiful country. It's very idyllic. It reminds pretty much about Swedish countryside, and But it's one thing stands out. Almost in every small village you get to, the graveyards are too big, and there are always funerals everywhere. So that's the only thing that you can see when you travel through a country about that reminds of war. When we get to Kiev, it's a huge city. I think twice or a third as large as Stockholm, and it's have every facilities you can ask for. As Johan said, you can have a cappuccino or whatever, and payment, cell phones, everything works perfectly well. And this is something that people don't expect when you talk about Ukraine and see all this picture of war and so on. So it's a different kind of war, but it's important, I think, to have this picture to start with. In nights in Kiev, you have these air alarms where you are supposed to go to shelters. No one do. They use this kind of two-wall system, as they say. You should have two walls between you and the outside, so that if a grenade hits the first wall, you're protected by the other one. So it's but it's almost every night there's air alarms there. So that's kind of the context, and I'll show you some results from what I understand as is the question, the answer of the question: how can the civil society be big in Ukraine even if they don't trust each other, and even if they don't have a long history of what we call civil society? We have in our project used a theoretical model for this, that resilience and civil preparedness built on resources, engagement and network. Among other things, we are interested in civic skills, civic mindedness, trust, and formal and informal networks. Meaning that this is the skill to act as a citizen, among other things, how to organize, which I think we're good at in Sweden, civic mindedness, that is about motivation to engage as a citizen, trust, and I will talk much more about trust, and networks, both formal and informal networks. And as we shall see, this is a division that is very important when you try to compare Sweden and Ukraine. And we made two identical surveys, one in Sweden, where we asked 5,000 Swedes about trust, civic engagement, preparedness, and so on. And we did the same survey in Ukraine, asking 1,500 Ukrainians all over Ukraine about these things. And you should this is a result overview that you see here. First, we have some numbers about willingness to defend or willingness to act in crisis. And you have Ukraine in December 2024 and Sweden June 2022. So it's different in time, but you can see that both countries think that 92% in Ukraine and 93% in Sweden think that the country should defend themselves if they are being attacked. And in Ukraine's case, we asked, do you think it was right to defend yourself when this happened? So that's an extremely high number, and the number within parentheses is those who agreed very much to this. If you ask about a person, are you ready to you yourself defend the country with armed and risk for your own life? Then 29% of the Ukrainians said yes, while 60% of the Swedes said yes. And to me, this makes sense since there are many Ukrainians that already do this, and also they have relatives and so on that have done this, and they actually know very well what it means. But I have discussed these numbers with Ukrainian researchers, and they think that the numbers also that the number 60% in Sweden seems to be valid if you understand it in this context. I will talk more about trust, but I can tell you already that social trust, that means if you trust people that you don't know, if you trust people in general. 73% in Sweden trust people in general, only 32% in Ukraine. So there's a huge difference in social trust. If you look at engagement in civil society, you can see that the numbers for sports organizations, for example, 4% of the Ukrainians were active in sport organizations, 27% in Sweden, and so on. I think you should notice this percentage. 51% of the Ukrainians were engaged in some kind of engagement connected to the defense forces or the armed forces. More for curiosity, this is the numbers for happiness. I think this is a pretty high number, that almost 2/3 of the Ukrainians are rather happy or very happy, although it has been a war going on for a long time. We don't talk much about this in Sweden, but the pride of the nation is the same both in Sweden and Ukraine. It's very high both in Sweden and Ukraine, and this, I will go into this also. But when we ask people, is it fair to share your resources in times of crisis? 80%, 4 out of 5 in Ukraine says yes, and 90% in Sweden says yes. When I presented this number before, everyone said, no way, that's much too high number, we don't believe in it. But when we see that Ukrainians that have already been into this also show these high numbers, it make more sense, I think. So let me tell you something about trust in Sweden and Ukraine. And as I have already told you, generalized trust, social trust, there's a big difference there. But we should know that 32% from Ukraine is not a very low number. It's a number comparable to France, for example. It's the number, the 73% in Sweden, that is very high. Together with the other Nordic countries, it's called the Nordic or the Swedish gold, that we actually trust each other. And I have a small store there. Johan, vad hette den här Nobelpristagaren som var här för några år sedan, ekonomen? Ja, Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize, she visited us some years ago and told a little story saying that, well, your Swedes are often seen as naive and so on, and you actually trust people very much. You do, yes, but it's a good thing, because if you trust people, you will close deals much faster. You will close 10 deals and we will be fooled 1 or 2 times at the same time as other nations will close 1 or 2 deals. And they will not be fooled, but they will close much. They will make much less money because they don't trust each other. They won't get things done, so to say. So trusting each other is getting things done, was her point. And I think that's interesting, and I think that's one reason why this generalized trust is important. If you look at, if you argue about this, you often hear the argument, we don't believe in anyone, but we believe very much in our family. Okay, so look at the picture when it comes to believing in family and friends. That is called particularized trust. Again, it is in Ukraine and Sweden. It's high in both. So that you trust people in general does not mean that you trust your family little, or that you trust your family much does not mean that you trust others much. So this is an interesting pattern, I think, and it will also play a role when it comes to understanding giving and fundraising in Ukraine later on. Last one, institutional trust in the institutions. You can see that there's in many cases a big difference between Ukraine and Sweden. We trust our justice system much more. We trust our government much more. But there's interesting that in Ukraine you trust your armed forces to a very high degree. 93% trust the armed forces. We have a high number in Sweden there also, 84%, but not that high. And when we this, some of you have been talking about this today, trusting charitable and humanitarian organization, it's quite high in both countries and at the same level. And again, I think this is interesting, that you don't trust people in general, but you still trust civil society organizations. So this is trust. I catch my breath and ask already, do any of you have any question or comment? Yes?
It doesn't work. Yeah, it works. Thank you very much. Did you look into the trust in media?
Yes, we did. I don't have the numbers right now, but my guess would be that it is medium high in both countries, but for different reasons. That's what I remember, but I'm not absolutely sure.
Do I see hands? No? I, of course, have a question.
Yeah.
A couple of pictures back.
Okay.
If I can... I thought... Yeah.
Is it about my name?
The pride of nation has close to doubled.
No, it's not doubled. This is, I'm very proud of my nation.
Okay.
And this is, I'm very or rather proud.
Got it.
So that's why.
That answers my question.
And I think it's interesting that it's so identical.
Yeah. I'm going to run down here.
Thank you. Since you put the slide back, on the second number, the warm armed life at risk, the willingness to go. No, like that was there already. Yeah. The number is 29. I understood that your sample was 1,500 people in Ukraine.
Yes.
But I don't assume that those are the people who already are fighting in the, fighting for the country. So the willingness to go to the war is 29%. It seems rather low, but it depends on your sample.
You're right. And actually, you see 4 plus 5 there. This means that 4% of these 29% says, I already do that. So they are 4% out of 29 is already fighting for the country. But still, you got a point. I think the number would be somewhat higher if you added these. But again, you should bear in mind that it's a very little proportion of everyone that is fighting in armed forces compared to the whole population. But it would affect something. Yeah, I think so. Should I continue, or no more questions?
Do you have more slides?
Yes, I have more slides. And I have some time, I hope.
Unless they start pulling out fika.
Okay. So let me. How much time do I have? I thought I had 45 minutes, but.
Until half. Yep.
Half. Okay. So let me say something about civic engagement very briefly. As I told you, there are there are big differences in how you are engaged in different activities. But you can see that in Ukraine you are much more active in church, and also again here's the 51% where you are active in voluntary organizations assisting the defense forces in Ukraine. Half of the population says they do that, and there where the giving comes in. People arrange kind of giving circles and so on, and also there's a pretty high number of this kind of humanitarian organizations, which is maybe to expect. So when you look at the engagement in civic activities in Ukraine, you can see that there are specifically networks. They are networks based rather than organization based, meaning that they are loose networks. You don't have this kind of Swedish formal organizations which they think is heavy to run, and they're also since the old Soviet days, they don't trust that kind of formal organizations, because that means you're registered and so on, and you don't have this kind of formal organizations because that means that you collaborate with people that you don't know. So you prefer to create networks with people that you actually know, your friends and family and so on, and you collect money in loose networks. You send them directly to the armed forces, or you buy equipment and send to the armed forces. And when you send money or stuff to the armed forces, you don't send it to the armed forces in general. You send it to a specific military unit. So you send it, for example, to the unit where you're son are stationed or something like that. So, and I think this is a pretty strange way for us to in Sweden to think about this, because we are that would almost be kind of a nepotism or something like that. If you should give things, should give it to another organization or something, not to the a specific unit. But that's the common thing to do in Ukraine. You collect money in loose networks and you give it to specific units. And this, I think, is an important this is an important key to understand the civil society in Ukraine. It is not about big formal organizations that we old big formal organizations that we often have in Sweden, but it's temporarily loose networks containing people that you already know. So in a theoretical language, we will talk about it. It's not bridging social capital, but it's bonding social capital. It's about, so to say, and what does this mean to the Ukraine in future when it comes to rebuilding the country, for example? I think that I usually say that if I want to play a football match, I would do it in Ukraine. It's very easy to go to your closest friends and play a football match. They are always there. So, but if you want to arrange a national tournament, I would prefer to be in Sweden, because we have all these kind of organizations on all levels and used to be organized and so on. So it's when it comes to the next step, when it comes to rebuild Ukraine, I think this kind of organizations, instead of this kind of loose networks, is very important. So I think there's a step for the Ukrainian civil society to take, and I think they are on it, but they are not always there yet. But to actually create, evolve from loose networks to formal organizations, so that because this is also a way, when you get formal and they create rules and principles and so on, you also avoid corruption and so on, right? So this is, I think, it's an important step. And for the moment, these kind of networks are collecting lots and lots of money. I don't know how much, because it changes all the time, but they are collecting a lot of money that is flowing all over Ukraine right now. But how do you turn this and turn also international funds into formal organizations? That's an important thing, I think. So I will end with what I think is a positive picture that I already told you, but I will highlight it again. In Ukraine, 80% believe that it makes sense to share with others in a crisis situation, and in Sweden it's 90%. We are prepared, we are willing to share, and I think these are important numbers. Every time I tell these numbers, people say, well, it's not that much, it's only what you say. And study after study, I see that I think these are pretty solid numbers. So this is, at least for me, it's a positive thing to see. So thank you very much. Any more questions?
Thank you very much. Yeah. Well, we as monitoring agencies, I think in our countries are often asked, where are the scandals with fundraising or with giving donations to the Ukraine? So far as I know, we have no big scandals in using the funds. Did you had any clue, any information doing your studies on reasons for distrust or on any existing scandals? And a second question, if the fact that most of the funds of the donations are used not by formal organizations but by informal networks, maybe this is a reason for more trustworthy use of the funds, or it is a reason that it is more difficult to make proof that there, even in the informal networks, there was some frauds?
Well, the first question, I think, what we see in our numbers, in our surveys, is that people trust charity organizations very much, and much more than the government. And when I talk to people, they aren't even angry at the government. They said, well, they are corrupt. We don't trust them at all. They just smile about it. It's but the trust in civil society organizations seem to be very solid, and I think it's partly because what you are saying, namely that you can see how the money travels from when you collect it to where it lands, so to say. So in that sense, I think it's a high trust. But also, I think you will see scandals, because if you collect money to buy a car to your son who is stationed at the platoon, you have to buy 2 cars, one for your son and one to his officer, in order to make him get the car. So that kind of things do happen, and people are prepared about it, and that's of course not a good thing. But I haven't heard about any larger scandals either so far. But I have heard a lot of trust in civil society, and yeah.
Thank you very much for highlighting such an important issue of trust. And you raised a lot of issues about the public having trust on civil society organization vis-a-vis. And I think post this conflict, my understanding is that there would be also a local or a domestic civil society, whereas a lot of international charity organizations coming into Ukraine and providing various kind of humanitarian aid and other assistance. So is it the issue with the local civil society organization or with the international organization as well? Are there separate parameters for monitoring these two organizations?
Yeah, if I understand your questions right, it's about the difference between local and national organizations, and also the importance of local organizations. I think you're absolutely right. It starts with loose networks, it develops to local organizations, and I think that's pretty much where Ukrainian organizations are right now. But the what I think is, in order for international organizations to connect to the civil society in Ukraine, you have to connect to national civil society organizations, because it will be too scattered to connect to local ones. And that's, I think, is maybe one problem, but let's see about it. The Ukrainians have been very good at fixing these things so far.